plugin of the week is the Radix drum leveler. This is a unique company. Radix makes some very, very interesting plugins, and I really love this, and I thought it was worth taking a look at. This is a very cool dynamic processor because the way that it works is that it fundamentally allows you to control the dynamics of individual elements of any type of thing, but it's kind of more or less designed, it seems, for drums, you know, so you probably use it on other instruments, but this is the basic fundamental design. And essentially what you have are two thresholds and a target level, and this sort of sets the stage for all of the basic work that you do with it. So what I have here is a snare drum, and on this particular snare drum, some of the problems that I have with the original snare, and I have a trigger on it, so I'm sure you saw that on there. Let me kind of scroll down to the track. But what I have on this snare track is there's a lot of in-between type of stuff in the snare that kind of goes in, and there's some builds and things like that. And what ends up happening with some of this information is that it becomes a little bit imbalanced, and I kind of want to even it out. So because this is a triggered sample thing, I'll show you one application for this. If you actually were working with an acoustic drum, there's a different approach that you can kind of take with it, and we'll kind of talk about that. So we have a bunch of settings here, which I'm going to get to in a second, but I want to focus on the two thresholds first and talk about the target level. So primarily what you have is a low threshold and a high threshold. Now, the way that this works is that signals that are above this threshold will get processed, and they will get processed towards the target level. Okay, now they could also get processed away from the target level, and that's based on the compression setting. We'll get to that in a second. On the other side, we have a threshold, and signals below this threshold will also get processed, and they will get processed towards the trigger level, or if the compression is set to expansion in the other direction, away from the target level. So this is the basic idea, assuming that the target level is kind of in between here. So this is kind of part of where it gets to be really fun. So as you feed an audio signal in, what you're going to see is, and we'll just kind of cue this up, so we'll hear a snare drum. What you have here on the input, which is kind of cool, is that you see this multicolored meter. It's actually showing you not only level, overall level, which you see on any meter, but level in a color scheme. So you're actually seeing the different frequencies. It's showing you a different frequency spectrum map, starting with red for low frequencies and going all the way up to violet. So it follows the color spectrum as we know it in terms of frequencies. So when you look at that, you could see where those frequencies are kind of setting in to all this. So what happens is that if I want to, for example, process this, you could see here, if I set this threshold low, what's going to happen is some of these are going to turn into gray. So gray means that it's the original signal passing through. Orange means that the signal is pushed up towards the target. And if I move this above, you can see here that now those peaks are pulled lower towards the target level. So if I lower the target level, right, they will kind of move toward that. Now, the aggressiveness of that is based on the compression setting. So if I make this happen here, I could basically make all those peaks, right? And if I lower my threshold here, I can create some fun artifacts here in between. So let's just, I can make everything the exact same level. And of course it sounds weird because that's not, you know, that's not practical. That's not really what I want to do with this. I don't want to eliminate the dynamic range, but what I can do here on this, and this threshold would be largely based on what it was. So if we were dealing with an acoustic snare, there would be a lot more bleed, and I want to raise this above the bleed. But what it allows you to do is to take things like if you have ghost notes in a snare and things like that, that are kind of going in to kind of bring them up or pull them up towards the target level while simultaneously controlling and making more consistent the snare hits. So if we take a look at what's going on here, you could see that there is a fair amount of movement, you know, and dynamic, and some of that is good. This is not about eliminating all of that, although you have the ability to do that. What it is about doing, or what it is about, is finding a way of kind of leveling and controlling what's going on. So now, there are some other controls here which we're going to get into. There's a hold and a recovery control. So this determines after the threshold is crossed and the processing occurs, how long is it going to hold that gain and how long that gain movement towards the target line or away from it. I'll get to that in a second. and how long will it take to recover. Okay, so you will set these according to how busy the part is and the tempo of the song. So if you have a fast tempo, typically these settings are going to be smaller. If you have a slow tempo, typically the settings will probably be longer. But again, based on the performance in the individual part, and you have to kind of go accordingly. And there's also a gate which can be applied. So you can set a gate range that can work in either direction, either in a negative or a positive direction. Okay. There's also a minimum retrigger point. So what happens is that you may end up with the way that your threshold is set up, you may end up with multiple triggers where they don't exist, and this can create some artifacts in between. So you could set a minimum retrigger, and this will kind of help to clean up. But it's a very intelligent processor in terms of the way it goes. And then there's a gain range. So what the gain range does is it allows you to control how far or how much gain, what is the maximum gain that it would add going in, or take away from the signal. So if we max this out here, it will go as aggressive as I set my compression level here. So this is like another way of kind of controlling how aggressive and how much of the dynamic is kind of left in, as well as kind of working with the compression control. So it's very cool. You can adjust the input, you can adjust the output level. So if you need that to kind of target things or kind of work with it. So I can get this kind of working fairly consistently. Let's hear that same part without all of this. And now with it. And what you'll see here is the amount of gain reduction and the amount of movement upward expansion that kind of pulls the signal towards the threshold. So you could see your sort of gain reduction, gain addition metering right here. The orange is always gain up, gain being added, and the blue or the light blue is gain being moved back downward. The basic idea, the fundamental idea of this is you can actually go in and quickly smooth out a performance. So if I kind of add the kick drum in here, so if I pull this down, none of the kicks, right, will actually change. Unless they fall below this target level here. So this will kind of pull them up, and then I can create more consistency. And then this just essentially becomes my output target level. And from here, I can basically create the consistency within the overall track. And so just to hear these two without, let's just hear them without. And then with. So there's much more consistency in this particular part with the kick drum. So you're seeing a lot less change there on that side. But the overall effect of it is that it can kind of smooth out uneven performances. Now, the way that you use it and how much you use it, you want to try to be musical. There are times where, when you want a mix, like a drum sound, an acoustic drum sound or a programmed drum sound to sound very upfront and kind of focused, you want to kind of bring up that low level stuff, that low level information that isn't quite resonating through or is a little bit uneven, and even it out a little bit more, and you can kind of nudge that up so that the drums sound more present and more forward in terms of the way that they work, and you can control the amount of compression. And even if you just don't want to manage any of the peaks, you just want to bring up low-level stuff, just bring that high threshold down so it's not affecting any of the normal hard hits, but it's only bringing up the low-level hits. So all that in-between stuff on the snare hits. And then you can essentially determine how much you want that to occur by adjusting, the gain range. So you can hear those in-between things and how much the gain changes there, or by adjusting the ratio. On the opposite end, if I take it in the other direction, what I can do actually is I can do the opposite, which is, and I'll take care of the kick here. And now what I'm doing is signals here that fall below are getting lessened. So it's doing the opposite. So it's dropping these down and moving these up. So as I said before, one will move towards the target, one will move it away from the target. So this, in effect, becomes a little bit more like a gate. And then, the distance and how far you move it, will be based, on, will determine a lot of the musicality. But it's a very, very powerful tool in terms of just dynamic control over the individual sound. It's very musical. You can see just with the basic, and this is the default settings, the way that it's kind of working here, it comes up pretty quickly. I would adjust this. I normally think of hold and recovery times in terms of tempo, so that's a good thing. The way that the hold and recovery works is that you get the hold cycle first, 80 milliseconds, and then you get the recovery cycle after that. So if you think that on normal bits, for example, that maybe the snare is every other beat, it's like half notes, or maybe it's more busy, it's quarter notes or eighth notes or 16th notes or whatever it is, you could start to program that total time into there, and you might find that those cumulative times work out. You'll find, or you notice here, that the hold is about 1/3 of what the recovery time is. So if you think of it like 1/4 hold time, 3/4 of recovery time, that's probably going to be a pretty good formula, with the total millisecond time being some kind of musical value, whether that's eighth note, quarter note, half note, etc., based on what's going on. So everything is going to be individual process. You also have a sidechain filter here, which is cool. And the sidechain filter allows you to control any bleed that's coming up. So because this is a programmed drums, you're not going to, get this, but there's two filter types. One is basically, a high pass and low pass filters butted together, so a band pass filter essentially. And what you have here is you're allowing signals to pass through. So I might use something like this for a snare drum, but here what I'm doing is a band reject. So now what we're doing is we're allowing low frequencies to cut through and allowing higher frequencies to cut through. And what you could do is sort of carve away, snare bleed into a kick mic, and then that would allow you to get maybe a kick drum to kind of trigger more consistently. You can activate the sidechain here. You could solo it up and monitor what it is, so you can adjust the filters accordingly. Always listen to it, notice what's going on, and then you can activate that. So if you find that it's kind of triggering inconsistently, or there's something that's amiss, just like with any kind of gate or processing, you want to use some kind of sidechain. Even many vintage compressors have sidechain equalization characteristics built in. You may not see them, you may not have control over them, but because they're designed for a certain purpose, those things are factored inside the box, and that sets up a lot of what it is that you're doing. But this is a really, really powerful plugin. Very simple, very transparent in terms of the way that it works. In other words, it's not affecting tonal character or quality. It really seems to very transparently control the gain and kind of manage things. And a very, very powerful tool because it's more than just an upward expander, downward compressor kind of in one. There are some things that are like that. It kind of embodies all of that. Plus, you have so much more control over the individual characteristics, how much of it you do, how aggressively do you apply it, what is the hold and recovery settings. And these are things with some plugins where you have just two thresholds and you pull them together and it mushes everything together, is not going to give you the detail and precision that you're looking for. Really, 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 really cool one. Love this plugin. This is the Drum Leveler by Radix.